Hello. Hi there, and welcome to the Summit Online, AWS Summit Online. This session is on Amazon's approach to sustainability, and I'm really pleased to be here today to talk to you about this incredibly important topic, and hopefully just share some of the things that are going on across Amazon and AWS, and maybe even share just a few sort of peculiar ways we at Amazon approach important topics like sustainability. I'm joined by Sarah Slayman, my colleague in the US, and Sarah's a AWS Sustainability Business Development Manager, and she has tons of experience and insight into sustainability that she will be sharing with you later on. So let's kick off and just do a bit of a tour of sustainability and start with, I think, quite an inspirational quote from our executive chairman, once upon a time our CEO and chairman of the company of Amazon, Jeff Bezos. And Jeff, for those that weren't aware, issues a letter to shareholders that accompany our annual report once a year. And here's a small extract from his letter to shareholders of 2020. Jeff here talks about the fact that we launched the Climate Pledge together with Global Optimism in September 2019, because we wanted to help drive this positive revolution. We need to be part of a growing number of corporations that understand the imperatives and the opportunities in the 21st century around sustainability and addressing climate change. In fact, Jeff continues that theme in his 2021 letter to shareholders, where he talks about the imperative to focus on climate change. Just a little bit of how does Amazon innovate? What makes us tick? How do we get things done in the organization? And everything, right, stems from our mission to be the Earth's most customer-centric company. This is a broad topic, right, meaning that it doesn't restrict us to any particular market or technology. And it's a mission not defined by industry, right, or geography. We aim to be a customer-centric company, and that can take the forms in many different shapes and sizes. So it's not just about selling books and retail business or e-commerce, but it captures many different ways in which we can serve our customers and really fulfill that mission. And where innovation begins, right? We start with the customer and work backwards. I'll talk about that a little bit more later on, but we found it's critical, especially when addressing sustainability challenges and opportunities, that we dig into the world of our customers and we work backwards to invent on their behalf and build new experiences, new products, new services that help make their lives better, their world better, and serve them in better ways. So it's not, just as necessarily being about close to a customer, right, and understanding a little bit about, their world and asking them questions. It really is diving deep to understand their situation. Look, of course, there are many viable approaches to innovation, and we're certainly not saying that this is the best or the only way in which you innovate as an organization. It's a way that really works well for us. And we fine-tuned this and worked on this over the duration of the history of Amazon to really make it an effective means of developing new products, new services, new ways of doing things, improving what we do to better serve our customers by working backwards from their needs. So hopefully I'm going to express this in a humble way. It's a methodology or an approach to innovation that works really well for us. So if your organization has innovation from product or technology, or maybe it's a competitor influence-led type approach, if it works for you, that's fantastic. But it's great to just say that within our organization we have this customer obsession which drives innovation from their behalf. Really just sort of touching upon sustainability at Amazon. I hope that you are familiar with the announcement that we made in September 2019 with Global Optimism. It was our commitment and our stake in the ground to put in place a program of carbon reduction and driving towards a net zero by 2040 commitment as part of this climate pledge, along with Global Optimism. It's a very ambitious target. The intention is to be 10 years ahead of the Paris Agreement, and limit warming to 1.5 degrees. We use science-based targets within our organization to help us formulate our carbon reduction programs. We have a net zero ambition. That means that our emissions will be net zero in terms of the sort of a balanced account by 2040. And as Sarah Slayman will talk about in a bit more detail later on, we have a huge focus on renewable energy and energy innovation to help drive our business to that net zero place. But also, in any good sustainability program, it's always good to start with reduce what you can, and implement innovation and new technologies to reduce energy consumption and efficiency where you can. But then ultimately looking at things like credible carbon offsets to bring you down to zero. So it's a very exciting program. The Climate Pledge, in conjunction with over 110 organizations now, are influencing others to commit to these net zero programs and themselves go on this journey. So it's extremely exciting that we're doing this, and I encourage you to take a look at the Climate Pledge and maybe put yourself forward to participate. Here's just a little bit of an overview of some of the organizations. As you can imagine, you can learn more about participation online. We have a very rich resource online to give you more information on the Climate Pledge and, in fact, a lot of what Amazon is doing around sustainability. But it's really great to be there alongside Global Optimism and Best Buy and Unilever and Microsoft and Mercedes and Cabify to really just sort of work together and also encourage others to set these ambitious net zero targets. I alluded to this a little bit earlier on, but the Climate Pledge just asks for three things. That net zero 10 years early in accordance to the Paris Climate Accord, and really implementing regular reporting as per science-based targets initiatives, and obviously working towards reducing carbon across your business, be it scope 1, 2, and 3. For those of you not familiar with the scope 1, 2, and 3 terminology, it really is just looking at where your carbon footprints comes from. So scope 1 and 2 really about sort of buildings and operational facilities and the energy consumption and fossil fuel usage within your organization. Within scope 3, that is a much wider extension of your carbon footprint. So it's taking ownership and measurement and engagement in reducing carbon emissions from scope 3. So that could be something that is carbon emissions that are generated by suppliers, for example, that are building products on your behalf for you to then take to market. So that would feature as a scope 3 carbon emission. Anyway, that point 2 around carbon elimination, there is a commitment from Climate Pledge organizations to embark on climate elimination. And as suggested earlier on, what you can't minimize, what you can't remove, you can credibly offset using offsetting through good quality offset services. So I hope that gives you just a little bit of an insight into the culture and the way in which we innovate, and obviously the importance of sustainability and climate change within our organization, an introduction to the Climate Pledge itself. And now I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Sarah Slayman, that's going to take us through just a bit more detail into what's going on within Amazon and AWS around sustainability. Sarah, over to you.
Great. Thank you, Neil, for that introduction. So Neil has talked to us about Amazon's approach to problem solving and introducing our working backwards process. And then he's talked to you about our Climate Pledge commitment and the Amazon-wide commitment, which includes AWS to be net zero carbon by 2040. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit more about how we're achieving that, both at Amazon and at AWS. So to start with, we're really meeting this commitment through the use of renewable energy in a big way. Amazon is actually the world's largest corporate purchaser of renewable energy. We're also the largest corporate purchaser of renewable energy both in Europe and in the US. we have a huge amount of renewable energy. It's actually 232 global projects, and 85 of those are on the same scale as a utility. Now, those are wind and solar projects throughout the world. And we even look for innovative ways to use renewable energy and locations that are difficult. For example, we have a renewable energy project in Singapore, which is an area that is traditionally hard to put renewable energy projects in place. We have 10 gigawatts of total renewable energy capacity, which is a massive amount. That's actually enough to power about 7 million European homes. So certainly one of the biggest levers we have to meet our net zero commitments and renewable energy commitments are the purchase and use of renewable energy. We are also looking at technology and looking across our operations for ways to decarbonize. One way we've done that is through the Climate Pledge Fund, and that is a dedicated $2 billion that is going to companies, and they might be startups, but they might be of any size. It's really just companies who are being visionary in terms of tackling some of the biggest carbon emitters. So, one example of this would be concrete. Concrete is traditionally a really large source of carbon. It takes a lot of carbon to produce concrete. Well, there are some companies, one of them being CarbonCure, who is a recipient of this Climate Pledge Fund, who are actually looking at how to embed carbon inside concrete so that it's reducing total amount of carbon instead of emitting more. We're also tackling hard things like aviation with the Climate Pledge Fund and our investments in companies like Boom Supersonic. And then we're looking beyond technology and innovation to nature-based solutions as well. We have a partnership with the Nature Conservancy, and we have a dedicated $100 million in what we call the Right Now Climate Fund to restore and protect forests, wetlands, and peatlands around the world. Now, in our operations, we're looking throughout the business to find ways to optimize and reduce the energy needed to perform our operations. One of these is addressing those shipments, the packages that you get to your door every day. So we actually have a sub-goal where, of course, all shipments will be net zero carbon by 2040 in line with the Climate Pledge. We're also looking to have at least half of shipments net zero carbon by 2030. And that's the entire life of that item, right? Picked off the shelf, its packaging, its shipping, and the last mile to your doorstep. And the way that we're doing that is looking at the entire process and building in efficiency and renewable energy throughout the entire process. So one of those would be solar roofs. Now, we have solar roofs on a large amount of Amazon facilities throughout the world, and these are large roofs. One solar roof can actually provide up to 80% of the facility's power needs. So really a significant thing to do, especially looking at the scope of the facilities that we have. We have also ordered 100,000 electric delivery vehicles from a company called Rivian. They are also a Climate Pledge Fund recipient. And this is the largest ever order of electric delivery vehicles. And we're also working with Rivian to really design these vehicles to be efficient for shipping and to consider things like route optimization, like what's the most optimal way to charge these vehicles, and to look at that last mile delivery and work with Rivian to be extremely efficient in doing those deliveries. So that's a few of the ways that Amazon is working on meeting our Climate Pledge goals. I also want to talk to you about AWS and Amazon Web Services. That's where I work, and I think that's where many of you are relying for a lot of your IT service needs and hosting. And we are absolutely considering the Climate Pledge goals and efficiency and optimization throughout AWS. We know from a study done by 451 Research that AWS infrastructure is 3.6 times more energy efficient than the median surveyed US data center. And AWS can perform the same task with an 88% lower carbon footprint. And those are really significant numbers. What that's saying is that just by moving from a typical on-premises data center into AWS, you're getting an 88% reduction in the carbon footprint of your IT. That's really significant. And what we see is that most of that, it's actually 61%, comes from more efficient servers and higher server utilization. We're just really good at running servers at high utilization in a very efficient way. 11% of that, 88%, is because of our facilities. And we really design data center facilities to think about efficiency throughout. And then 17% of that comes from the renewable energy usage that I've discussed. And in fact, that has increased since this study has taken place. Let me give you an example of the kinds of efficiencies that I'm talking about. Just to kick off the example, I love this quote from Senior Vice President of AWS Infrastructure and Support, Peter DeSantis, which is, "The greenest energy is the energy we don't use." And that should really be the way all of us approach IT and sustainability in IT, right? Which is optimize first, and then, of course, source renewable and more sustainable forms of energy after that. But that's something we're doing in our own data centers. And one way we've done that is by removing the central UPS. The central UPS was replaced with sort of micro UPSs. It's kind of how you can think about them. But what that did was reduce energy conversions, and that, along with some further optimizations on the rack, produced a 35% reduction in the energy needed, which is, again, when you think about the scope of our data centers, that's a significant reduction. We're also introducing new technology that is more sustainable into the servers and processors themselves. Graviton2 is an excellent example of that. Graviton2, which is ARM-based, delivers 2 to 3.5 times better performance per watt than any other processor in AWS. Now, as a customer, you can also do things to reduce energy. And we talk about this quite a bit with just good architectural practices anyway, but you could be making sure that you're not running servers that you don't need. You can be using managed services because that way the scheduling is being done for you. And you can consider using the latest instance types, which are more efficient than older models, and using things like Graviton2. At AWS, we're not just looking at carbon footprint. We are also thinking holistically about water usage in our data centers and how we cool our data centers. We develop a water use strategy by evaluating the climate patterns in each region, and we choose the most appropriate strategy for the region and for the weather. But we have multiple kinds of technology in place to really reduce the amount of water used for cooling when that is needed. And primarily that is evaporative cooling, which is incredibly effective. In fact, in our data centers in Ireland and in Sweden, the evaporative cooling is so effective that we actually only need to use water for 5% of the year. So 95% of the year, it's not using any water. When we do need to use water, we reduce the amount of potable or drinking water used. We even work with local communities to make sure that this is being monitored and to reduce both the total water and the potable water usage. Okay, and I'm going to transition to talking about how AWS can also help customers across many industries be more sustainable. And I'm going to actually kick it to Neil to talk a little bit more about that and how our working backwards process can help with those goals.
Sarah, thank you so much for that overview. I think it's really exciting to really witness some of the innovation that's taking place across our business. From data center energy efficiency programs to water conservation programs to just really exciting innovation around things like sort of UPS power provisioning. It really does give you a kind of peek at, what is going on right across our organization, there to support our climate pledge commitment of net zero by 2040. I'm just going to take a moment just to talk about, again, go back to innovation, and using Amazon's approach to innovation is working backwards methodology to really help not only ourselves, but others address some of the barriers, hurdles, and opportunities that climate change and sustainability presents. And here's an interesting little sort of slide here talking about the questions we answer to really understand whether or not we have a strong product or service to take to our customer. So this little lanyard sort of card on the left-hand side of the slide just shows you the 5 working backwards questions. And we go to great pains to answer those questions. Who is the customer? What is the problem or opportunity that we are addressing, right? What is the most important customer benefit? And how do we know that the customer needs or wants, a solution to this? And importantly, what does the customer experience look like? So in the working backwards process that we can undertake in partnership with organizations and customers around the world, we strive to answer those 5 working backwards questions. And our working backwards process that we do in partnership is focusing on all manner of sustainability challenges, from consumption models to zero waste programs to Scope 3 measurement programs, just to sort of carbon sustainability data programs as well. So we're working across all segments, from pharmaceutical to engineering to retail to banking, to really work in partnership with organizations to really bring the best of our thinking and our innovation and our technology enablement to make those possible. And during the course of that process and answering those 5 working backwards questions, we capture the results of that innovation or that process in a very Amazonian way. We capture the business case in a press release format. So it really is capturing the idea, who the customer is, what the solution looks like, what the problem we're solving is, and diving into things like the sort of customer experience through customer quotes. So the press release is an internal document that is a future stating document that covers with a headline and with a sort of launch partner exactly what we're going to build, and way before we actually start the process of building anything. The press release itself, which is generally around 1 page, is supported by an FAQ document. And the FAQ document has 2 sections. It has a customer section that asks questions like, what is the product that we are launching today? Why are we launching it? How does this product work with other products, and so on? All of the sort of typical questions that you would expect a customer of a service or product to ask. And then there is an internal stakeholder FAQ. Generally, the kind of business questions that you would ask. How much will this cost? What resources are required? Why do we do this now? What is the best headline we can expect? What is the worst headline we can expect? Really, those types of questions are captured in the FAQ. And then we will go on to actually sort of sketch out the customer experience. So using sort of a panel illustration model, sort of 6 to 8 panels, to really describe visually the customer experience, which often highlights the problem that we're solving and the solution that we're building. So just to recap, so we have obviously lots of ways in which we want to work with organizations to address sustainability. But one of the things that we do and that we like to bring is this working backwards methodology to our customers to help really address maybe some of the gaps in the market, or some of the ways that aren't necessarily available to address the issues, opportunities that have been highlighted. And this slide hopefully will summarize a lot of what Sarah covered, and a lot of and obviously the the business innovation with the working backwards methodology. So we find customers really want to talk to us about 4 different areas. One is the first one on the left-hand side is just having better approaches to sustainability data management. You recall I mentioned Scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. We need to build much better ways of capturing and ingesting, processing and reporting on sustainability data. And AWS is right at the heart of that, working with organizations, partner organizations around the world to provide these solutions and these services to our customers. It's a really important area, and especially as we are in a COP26 year, 2021 event, UN event that's going to be held in Glasgow later on this year, there's going to be a lot more sort of national policy and regulation and stakeholder behavior around really ensuring that companies are able to disclose data and carbon performance. The second area is an area that, again, Sarah, my colleague, alluded to, is once you're in the cloud, there is so much you can do to optimize your cloud usage and your cloud functionality. So using sort of best practice and well-architected principles, you can make sure that your cloud usage is efficient, is energy efficient, and also saving you money. So that's something we're really passionate about. We want you to get the best out of the AWS cloud, and architecting for sustainability and efficiency and cost savings is certainly something we want to support you on. Third area, I've spoken about that at length, business innovation, working backwards from the needs of your customers, the customers that you serve, to create new products and offerings, but also using the working backwards methodology to maybe address some of the obstacles that you have in your sustainability program. And finally, just on the right-hand side, and again, Sarah's going to talk about some of these in the next section, think big and disruption. What are the things that we can do? You know, large-scale collaborations, accelerating R&D, and support of critical innovation that we're going to require to address, you know, climate issues and sustainability issues. So we love to help partners and customers really just amplify and accelerate and scale just great ideas and great practices. So I hope that gives you a nice understanding of the spectrum of the ways in which we can engage with you and help you on your sustainability program. I'm going to hand back to Sarah, and Sarah's going to talk about some other aspects of AWS sustainability. Sarah.
Okay, thank you so much, Neil. Really interesting to see how that working backwards process actually plays out, and that we actually do this with customers. And I know I've been a part of it, and it's always a really good session and workshop, and I've seen good results come from working backwards with customers. When we're talking about sustainability, that process can absolutely help in looking at solutions that use technology and then enable a sustainability outcome. And I want to give you a couple examples of those from our customers as we wrap up today. Firstly, I want to start with some of the ways that we help customers do that. And one of those ways is providing both the services. So among our over 200 services, many of them have fantastic applicability to sustainability, things like our analytics services, our AI/ML services, but also data. AWS actually provides petabytes of completely open and free data sets, which are directly used for sustainability projects. These are things like Earth imagery, weather data, forecast data, even biological data or population statistics. And a number of providers have come together to put these together on the Amazon Sustainability Data Initiative and make them freely and openly available for companies to use. And I've seen these used for all sorts of use cases like fleet management. I know that the insurance industry is using this to understand the risks associated with the climate crisis and put numbers to that. We also have a data exchange that has a dedicated portion just for sustainability. And here you can find another good set of data around weather and other impact factors. And you can also find a wealth of ESG, or environmental, social, and governance data, and find some of those rating data that you would need to evaluate companies and ESG performances. So beyond data, we are working directly with customers to build solutions that have really impactful sustainability outcomes. I want to tell you a few of their stories, and I want to start with Indigo Ag, and particularly their Indigo Carbon platform. Indigo Ag is a company who's bringing a new approach to agriculture. Agriculture traditionally is a major greenhouse gas contributor. It actually accounts for about 10% of US emissions. But Indigo Ag saw that it has the potential to do the opposite. And they used AWS's platform, and particularly a lot of our database services like Aurora, to create a carbon soil sequestration market. So this is essentially matching farmers with buyers. But what it's doing is encouraging these farmers to adopt new practices that actually sequester carbon into the soil and plant life as opposed to producing more. So these are things like no-till and crop rotation and other techniques. And they actually work with the farmers to enact these techniques, and then they are able to calculate the carbon credits that would be associated with these techniques and have that verified by a third party. And moving to another industry, we can see that other kinds of technologies like AI and ML can also really help with sustainability outcomes. And we're seeing that in transportation with multiple customers. But I want to bring to attention TuSimple. And TuSimple has built an autonomous truck driving system. And what they've done is use Amazon-based AI/ML to do smarter and better predictive analytics about the routes these trucks should take and how to save fuel with these autonomous driving systems. They've had some really interesting results. For example, the autonomous driver actually saves most of its fuel at those slow speeds, the under 10, under 20 mile an hour. That's really where it has a lot of fuel savings. I can only imagine that is because the autonomous driver has more patience and doesn't hit on the brake in traffic as much as a driver like I do, like me. But interesting results, and what's happening is they've actually measured a 10 to 20% savings in fuel just through adding this AI system. And then I'll leave you with our partner, Cognizant. They're a large digital services and consulting companies and a partner with Amazon. And they have built a platform that is taking building data. So this could be things like power meters, occupancy sensors, floor plan, alarms, and other energy information. And it's pulling this together into an analytics system and doing analysis to determine what is the most optimal heating and cooling and lighting and energy usage for that building. Now, Cognizant has piloted this in their own facilities and was able to measure up to a 17% reduction in the lighting energy needed for their facilities and a 12% reduction in HVAC energy. And again, those are really significant statistics. So hopefully these examples have got you thinking about what kinds of sustainability solutions could my business work on, how could technology enable that, and I would suggest, looking at the next steps in your journey, think about your business's sustainability goals. You probably already have some, and if not, think about creating some. You could look to the Climate Pledge for examples of what those science-based targets can look like. You can engage with the AWS Digital Innovation team to talk about your sustainability challenges. We can talk about the sustainability of your AWS architectures. And of course, we want to work with you to explore use cases for AWS sustainability data. I want to thank you for joining both Neil and I for this presentation. And if you could please fill out the session survey and give us your feedback, we'd really appreciate that.